Hello, and welcome to the next episode of Inclusion by Design, a podcast that talks about social inclusion. How do we build, nurture belongingness, and what does it mean to feel connected and part of a community that we call home? Before I dive into introducing our guest, I would like to request all of you to follow us, share this link with your friends, families, and people who love open ended and conversations on sometimes invisibilized themes and issues. Your small actions will help us in shaping the future of this series. So please do share. Okay, so back to the episode. Today's guest is Mr. Deep Purkayastha. He is the founder and director of an organization called Prajok. Prajok works with children who are in conflict with the law, children on child rights and child protection. One of the things that really inspires me about Deep's work is the work with specifically with young boys and men and the work on gender equity and nurturing healthy masculinities. Without any further delay, Deep, welcome to Inclusion by Design, and thank you for being a part of our podcast.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me. And it's lovely to actually meet you up after a long time. I think that's the highlight of everything.
So, Deep, please introduce yourself and a little bit about Prajok's work.
Prajok was founded in 1997, and we have been working and focusing on child protection. Now, at a time when child protection was not so much in the news or even in the consciousness of people in the development sector. In fact, child rights wasn't.
Yeah.
And even as late as 2000, let's say 5 and 6, when I'm digressing a little bit, but when we went into districts to talk about child rights, the question was, what? So children have rights? We know about human rights and women's rights, but what? Children have rights. I mean, that it was that sort of thing. So it's not quite so far. I mean,
Yeah.
back 2005 is like 20 years back. So we worked with child protection, but the angle around child protection was always a gender equity lens, because all the issues around child protection, whether it is about prevention of neglect or abuse or exploitation, if you just go, you analyze those, it's all about power, where children enjoy lesser power than adults, and therefore it is gendered. So children are often feminized. We used to achkeo type in the sense, but it's also about Ministry, Department of Women and Children. So children come within the women's world as such. So, so there was always a gender lens to it. Of course, issues like child marriage, child trafficking, child sexual abuse had, uh, absolutely gendered, reasons for them to happen. But even things like not sending a child to school, taking a child out of school and sending the boy to work are, at that time, we specifically wanted also, but since then, to look at boys, because often it was, children meant girl children.
Yeah.
In many times. So when we started our work also with boys in childcare institutions. So when we went into those childcare institutions, we realized we were the first NGO ever to put a set foot in a childcare institution for boys. With girls, there were lots of other people who were already working, because for various reasons. So there were victims of trafficking, there were victims of abuse, victims of violence in these homes. So mostly women's organizations or gender rights organizations would work with them, but there was nobody working with boys. From there, we went on to children who were connected with the railways. So a lot of boys would be picked up from railways. And then we realized that the boys were all running, running away from home. Many of them were abandoned. Many of them were orphaned, and their extended families wanted them out of their property.
So they were living in.
So they're living on the stations. They were making a living on the stations. With how the railways have also developed, you don't see too many of young children sweeping the train compartments now.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you will remember that even 20 years, 10 years back, you would find a lot of children on. So they would sweep the bogies, and they would collect money from people. They would collect food that was thrown out from the pantry cars, and they would sell water bottles. Sometimes they would work on with vendors on the railway station selling tea, cakes, whatever. So that's how they would earn a living. So that's how we started working, and then slowly into the communities, because we found a lot of these children coming from the very own communities because of, again, facing abuse and neglect in many ways. And as we went into the communities, of course, we had to address this issue of child marriage. Uh, West Bengal, by the way, as part of the National Family Health Survey 5, is topmost in child marriage in India. It hurts Bengalis to,
Acknowledge and
acknowledge
accept.
that, but that's what it is. And these are not like forced marriages of mostly not forced marriages of young girls. So these are all children who are running away. So it's not that children are not getting married or at 11, 12, or 15. I mean, I know that these instances have happened in areas we work with, in where we work in. And but it's mostly children who are running away. The children are running for various reasons. So whatever. So largely girls. So we also started a sports for uh, empowerment program where we used kabaddi as a very traditional sport to actually build self-efficacy among girls. Um, that has a lot to do with their decision whether they would want to run away with somebody or not. So so till then, so working with sports, that's been a new journey for the last, say, 5 years or 6 years, maybe. Yeah. So mostly we stayed on child protection, but have been using different methodologies and an increasingly gender lens. In fact, I think if somebody tells me what you liked the best was over the last 2, 3 years that we have been able to convince the child protection department in the government that if you want to work in child protection, you have to look at it from a gender lens. And they have organized seminars and etc. where they have invited me and other people like me to talk to them about that. And it was really encouraging when they actually said that, yeah, we understand what you're saying. We need to have a lens. So much, so good. So far, so good. At least people have acknowledged that, and I hope the child rights sector will slowly wake up to this uh, from our own history of being very charitable and distribute blankets and cake sort of thing to something more substantial.
I completely agree. This, working with children is like a blob. Children are, as if genderless kind of beings. But before I dive more deep into this, today's conversation, Deep, I want to steer a little bit. Like you said very correctly, I think Prajok was one of the first institutions that I got to know of who were working with children in conflict with law. So, and especially young boys who were put into these child care homes because of some acts of delinquency or breaking of law. And so, I want to focus a little bit of your work on that. So, I ask all my guests that if there was a alienation scale, a ranking, a scale of disconnect, stigmatization, neglect, invisibilization, where would these young boys who are in conflict with the law, where in the scale between 0 to 10 would you put them? How disconnected do you think they are from the mainstream or the outside society?
Well, like all children, they're not a very homogeneous category. So there will be different levels of disconnect. But for some, it could be as high as, I mean, if I say really disconnected is as 8, 9, 10. So some of them could be there, but certainly not very well connected. So the others could be around, say, 6, 7, 5 or something.
So it's highly, in many ways, it's more than average alienation.
Yes, 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 absolutely. And actually, in many ways, the many of the boys that I've worked with, the alienation starts right in the family.
Okay.
So there is a huge disconnect with parents.
So this is even prior to the incident
Yeah.
of crime.
So this is, when you talk to some of them about what happened and what their childhood was like, and these things will keep coming up. Uh, you talked about Dhrubashram. One of the very early times, well, when we worked in Dhrubashram, and we were talking to a young boy who had been picked up by the police. I mean, not getting to for what and etc. But when we were interviewing him, and we were sitting with him, and we saying that I need to draw up certain things, of your, in your family, and he would tell me this story about he drew this house where it was in a room which actually had a TV. So they were not coming from very underprivileged backgrounds. I mean, usually they were not. Uh, but he was alone in the room. So father was somewhere outside the house, the mother was in the kitchen, etc. And when we, um, you know, we were exploring if this was a general gendered role division he was making. We realized no, he wasn't, because he was saying that it was normal for him to be alone all the time. Uh, on the side, a lot of the children we work with on the railways would actually tell us that they run away because there is nobody at home to talk to and connect with. So ये दीवारें जो हैं हमें काटने के लिए दौड़ता है. So they would run away because of that. I mean, that complete
Sheer isolation.
Yeah. For some, if they were in other ways, adventurous or looking for some connection somewhere. For this particular child I was talking about, he was able to make friends with an older man, a young man who was married and who was living with his mother, and they made friends. And this is a common recruitment thing for people who want, young boys to come into their very organized grinds. They realize that those are the boys who are coming in who would otherwise feeling very disconnected with everybody, but there's the need to feel connected, like all of us. We want to be connected to somebody. We want to be related to somebody. And in a country like India, where in Bengal specifically, even in say the professional field, you're calling somebody dada, titi, this, that, etc. So you understand that behind it there is this need for affiliation.
Yes.
So this guy is supposed to have a marketer. It was a chicken shop he was running, and he made friends with this young guy, and said, "Come over to my chicken shop." And sometimes he would take this guy, younger guy, at home. This younger guy said Bodhi would, cook for me, and my dada's mother was very fond of me. She would take care of me and etc. I would often stay back at night at their place and etc. Till someday, then the dada told me, "Acha, every day you're sitting with me in the shop. Why don't you start sort of cutting the chickens etc." So in the beginning, I felt a little, uncomfortable to do that, but then that happened, and then slowly he realized that he was being asked to do things like, I think he was in some arms case or something. So can you take revolvers or this or that from here to there? So many other things happened then, and he got into it, and then of course he was caught. But even there, this is post 2000. So when the Juvenile Justice Act had come in, and for the first time, it was like that, if somebody was a juvenile and had committed an offense, he would not be treated like an adult. Yeah. So the entire trend of a lot of these syndicates or gangs to actually recruit young boys to do some of their work started then a lot more.
Yeah.
Um, and because they knew that these people will be like within 2.5 months or 3 months, they would be sent back, and so it was less expensive for them uh, to do this. So so this story was actually about the fact that there was no connection with one's own parents. There was no meaning left in some of the relationships he was looking at. He said he reported his father was very angry and he was extremely afraid to talk to his father. And mother was there, but she would not be
Very upset.
yeah, like not so affectionate or whatever. And here he founds a dada and a bodhi and a dida maybe or whatever, or a mashi or somebody so friendly who had absolute access to the household. And these are very symbolic stuff. In India, ranna kore khaiye diye sort of thing. So she cooks for me, or my dada invites me over for the meal. Then that
I'm wanted
I'm
out.
wanted and loved in this way. So this is an issue of that, the fact that a lot of the people s- start off, disconnected from their surroundings. It's not that they are not looking for connection, but sometimes they start looking for connections with exactly the sort of people who know that they need people who will be absolutely loyal to them and will not question them. It's a sort of grooming. আমরা সেক্সুয়াল এন্ডুজের কাছে গ্রুমিং বলি, বাট এটাও একটা গ্রুমিং এর একটা thought.
Of course, this is you prey on the vulnerability of this child, and then kind of entangle him in this
Exactly.
syndicate.
So, so there are varying degrees of that. There are some people who might have, somebody who's committed murder might come back and say that, yeah, I have committed murder because somebody wanted to kill me. They wanted to kill me. I thought they would hurt me, so I did this, and etc. Um, for them also, they would be rather cool about, um, what other people would say to them. What about, society? So even if society was stigmatizing, the guy was already looking at society from a very confrontational perspective. So he was anyway hostile. So who cares what they say? So this sort of disconnection and different levels are there. But I must say there is also a need for connection. And it is this need for connection and engagement which can actually, as everywhere, can make somebody really vulnerable. It's just that for boys, as I say, it is couched in a very different language. It is not couched in the language of vulnerability because this guy I was talking about is the one who was in the chicken shop. If we had not known him, and if we had not taken him into a mind space where there were colors and visuals to do, this person would not have normally, this boy, mentioned this. Because as boys, we are trained not to make a big fuss about these, the gentleness and tenderness and these emotions and our needs. You're supposed to just keep quiet about it. And you have needs, we have needs. Even now, in a lot of, men's groups, if a man just talks about something, the first typical response will be, ও এসব তো অনেকের হয়, আমাদের সবার হয়, ছেড়ে দে, ছেড়ে, লেটস হ্যাভ ফান। সো ইটস লাইক অলমোস্ট, আই ওন্ট সে ইনভিজিবলাইজেশন, বিকজ I'm getting to know that there is a problem. It's just a trivialization of everything. Everybody has problems. So as men, we are all supposed to have problems. We're all supposed to fight and, win.
Overcome this.
So don't be like, don't keep crying and weeping and whining about it. We are not here to be. So we are here to have fun. Now, that is often one of the reasons where uh, the connection gets cut. I would say when the connection gets cut with the father.
Okay.
This recruitment is often done by older guys with younger guys, and if you ask them, sometimes they will say, he's often like a father to me. So I am looking for a father who is tender and supportive. I don't get it with my usual father.
So
Why will I not latch on to that? Because I'm in need of something. Normally, for a boy to grow up, they also look forward to some role model, somebody to look forward to, how I have to conduct myself as a man. So it becomes important. Or somebody just gets it there.
So it's a very, very beautiful, a very soulful way of describing, I mean, we look at the boy as a juvenile who's committed a crime, and the backstory now that when you say the story of alienation and disconnect, it starts much earlier. And there is pent up anger and resentment and hostility. And then it's so much easier for this child to then fall prey to um, some kind of offense and confrontation with the law. And so in your work, Deep, I'm assuming then when you say that you work with young boys and masculinities and you see this as a gendered issue. So if you can give me an example of a case where a case or a couple of cases where how you look at this from a masculinity angle, and how, if there are any success stories about how an act of inclusion has actually transformed any the boy's life, the family's way of seeing this child, or even recidivism, going back into this life of crime. So has it stopped that? If you can give us some examples of that.
I'll give you an example easy for everybody to understand. This guy who's now 23, 24, and when he had committed a crime, he was under 18. It was a motorcycle theft thing. And when we first, Juvenile Justice Board forwarded us this case. And it was a nice, a lower middle class family. I would say in a middle class family because the father was absent the king, but father was in the police force. So
The father was in the police.
police force and would not be because he was posted to different places and etc. The boy had anger issues. Now, sometimes we forget that anger issues in boys often has to do with how boys are brought up, in the sense that in a very typical Bengali household, even if I used to get angry, it was not that it was celebrated. That's very simplistic thing that people say that, oh, men can get angry and celebrated. No, men are not celebrated because they're angry. Huh? People tell you, no, it's not right to get angry, this and that, etc. But okay, even if he gets angry sometimes, ছেলে তো একটু তো রাগ হবেই. I mean, okay, we'll have to deal with it. So somebody will tell me that, you should not be so angry and etc. তোমার পরে ক্ষতি হবে and all of that. But it will not be like you're not supposed to be angry because you're a boy. For the girl, the message would be very different.
Yeah. It's absolutely connected to being a woman.
So, and then the opposite message is no tears in your eyes, please. I mean, no whining, no crying. You're supposed to be a boy. I'm not going to kill you if you cry, but you're not going to be a very good man if you're going to learn to cry. Stop crying and getting. So, emotional expression it's a wrong thing that emotional expression is not allowed in men. It is allowed. Certain emotions are allowed. So, anger is allowed. And every time then I will learn how to express things with an anger sort of situation. If you've seen, and I also do it, so that's why I'm telling you that, when you have friends, male friends, and you're very close to them and etc. So all the time you're slapping somebody on the head or slapping them, or, why would you do that? And you say this is affection. All the no, this is very affectionate. Well, I can also hug the person but as a man, I have been brought up. They're not supposed to hug. This is what
acceptable than this.
that's this. So it's like an engagement, which is also like you hit somebody. You hit somebody and that's fine. So in Holi, you throw a balloon at somebody or something, that's fine. Those are sort of very aggressive ways of engaging. So you are allowed to do that, and you get to know that this will be allowed to a large extent. So the entire thing is about that, anger is allowed. And if the anger is allowed, then, anything that I do as a result of anger is allowed. So this guy had a big anger problem. So we had to talk to him. We befriended him slowly, and his mother. Was a very dear person. I mean, was a big support to this her son. This guy painted beautifully. And he said that, he completed his studies and then he wanted to join art college. The first time he didn't get through. The second time he did. So he's now in an government art college. And he's going to be an artist. And massive improvement in how he manages his anger. But that has a lot to do with, let me say, I won't put it as in counseling, but she says a lot to do with the acknowledgement he received from others like us, outsiders like us. The appreciation of what otherwise would be the softer side of his painting.
So usually what does he paint?
He paints sceneries, mostly sceneries. So, like a boat on the river, or a garden, stuff like that. Some faces. And he's good. It's not like, it was just an amateur thing. And I love painting is like that. So, since you got into Carbon Dot College, and I was asking him the other day when we met for this thing. So, what are the other things that you plan to do? So, I want to become a graphic artist, this, that, etc. So many other things. So, something very frankly, he would not have actually thought. And I would say that this was largely because of the program on alternatives to detention that we were doing with the government. If this guy would have been detained in the as a childcare homes, in any sort of institutionalization, how it affects the brain and how people see the work. I don't think this would have happened. It was just the fact that the Juvenile Justice Board, the principal magistrate there, acknowledged and realized, this guy needs to go back home, stay in the community, look at other avenues, need and get specialized support from, people like us. And therefore, get another chance to think about himself. I think that was very important. And so that's what I'm saying, so how very simply,
Yeah.
how boys are taught about what it is to be boys, what about it is about masculinity, about how to be men actually,
Yeah.
and how to train oneself to be men often leads to issues of violence and other things. Also because, if your threshold of violence is high, it's very difficult for you to empathize with somebody who has a lower threshold of violence. We have this famous word in Bangla called nakamo. So, as a nakamo Horishnato, which basically means two people have a different threshold of, pain or, uh,
So you
stress.
almost dismiss the other person's
Yeah.
experience.
Because আমি তো এটা deal করতে পারি. I can deal with it. Why can't you deal with it? For a lot of people, it's very difficult to look at, why should this person be there? আমিও করেছি, আমি very frank, আমরাও বলে থাকি এরকম, এত আথুকি কেন, এইটুকুতেই হয়ে গেল, এইটুকুতেই is where, because maybe my threshold of pain is higher, I can take in more things. তো ছেলেদের তো ট্রেন করা হয় to actually continuously raise the threshold of pain.
Yeah. So very interestingly, what you said was that the magistrate at the Juvenile Justice Court, actually that judgment about sending him back home, not keeping him in the detention center, sending him back home, and that small act, actually it's a pivotal act because that changed the trajectory of how this boy grew into a young man of who's today
He's a budding artist.
budding artist. So I want you to talk a little bit about this law, the juvenile justice law. I have heard you saying, Deep, that the law is exemplary. It's great. It's a strong, robust law. There is a lot of want in the implementation. There are gaps in implementation. But if you can just give me a little bit of history for my audience to understand how the JJ Act has moved, in the last 20 years, and how is it such a progressive, remarkable law, and what are some of the new things that have happened in this law which have changed the trajectories for many young boys like the one you just talked about.
So, Juvenile Justice Act in its present form has a lot of principles. There's a statement of a lot of principles. So, those are principles about, say, about participation. That the child's opinion needs to be heard.
Yes.
And it's not just about hearing opinions, it's also about that, the child must have a rational expectation that his opinions or her opinions will be acted upon.
Yeah.
So there is another principle called the principle of diversion.
Okay.
So you divert the child who is in conflict with law away from this entire formal judicial procedure.
Okay.
So it's not that it's going to be extrajudicial, that the principal magistrates or the JJB, the Juvenile Justice Board, will have nothing to do with it. I don't feel it should be that way. But you don't have to really to get through this and come to the juvenile justice board. Somebody questions you, what has happened, 5 attendances and etc. It can also be done from the police's side. So if a boy is brought to the police station, classical diversion would mean the police can also just say, okay, you've done this. We are keeping you, within our ambit, in our radar, but we are not taking you further. So this principle of diversion is there. It's not fully working in India. There's a lot of debate about it. Let me talk about is what is diversion, what is not. I mean, in diversion, does the police just let a child go, or does he inform the juvenile justice board, etc.? So there are varying, positions and etc. Well, in India, we'll have to find out our own definition of it sometime. But this principle of diversion has actually allowed us to push for this alternative to detention. It was not an easy task. We had to really fight with a lot of people with their ideas. As you know, it's like these guys have committed a crime.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what are you saying? They will not.
Are you defending them?
And you're saying that they shouldn't be punished. What are you saying about this? So you're saying that it's not about punishment or etc. It's about that we have to ensure that somebody does not commit the crime again. So this law is otherwise very progressive in the sense that it already has provisions that every child under 18 has a right to have a bail, unless giving him bail will put him into a problem. So if he goes back to the family, if he's done something where the neighbors or the community might actually harm you,
There's a backlash.
yeah, so don't give him bail only then. Otherwise, you have a right to get a bail. So you'll be bailed off. Punishments are like, community service. Punishments are like admonishment. Punishments are like, well, if you're working and if you're earning something, so because, under our new child labor laws, over 14, you can suffer. So a fine from your own money, you'd pay a fine. You might be sent for counseling, stuff like that.
But it's very restorative in nature, actually.
In a
sense.
In a sense, yes. So I don't see much of a problem with the law in assets.
In the word, there's no.
Yeah, people like us will always have problems with subsections. That's a different issue.
Okay.
But overall, I don't see this as a problem. It's the implementation part of it which sometimes gets into a problem.
I really like this this thing about diversion. I mean, it really keeps the child away from the rigmarole and the cruelty of the judicial.
And now it's, I mean, even if you don't want to be sentimental about it, about the system, it's now internationally seen that, if you actually divert children, there is recidivism comes down. So what do you really want? You want
Exactly.
that the offense should not be repeated again.
Offender changes his.
So my, even for me personally, it's not about, the sadness of my heart and how my heart beats. It's not like that. It's just that this is effective. I would do something which is effective. If diversion is what prevents the boy or a girl from, repeating that behavior, I would go along with this. And I remember even the Muktangan, the children connection with railways, the moment we were able to get the RPF on board and they provided a night shelter, a small space for children to come and have a bath, and there was a toilet and they could sleep at night, and they also had their lockers and stuff like that. The RPF, Railway Protection Force, said that juvenile crime rates plummeted by 61%, 75%.
So the petty crimes on
Petty crimes. So, and the opposite was laptops, golden ornaments, suitcases with cash were recovered by the children because they used to go onto the trains and handed over to the RPF. So just that bit of, that signal to one of these boys that, there is somebody, they had their own ways of saying कि कुछ तो हमारे सर के ऊपर RPF का हाथ है. हम RPF के बच्चे हैं. I mean, everybody stopped, beating them up. And for a long time, they would say, what was the benefit of this RPF program? So, social workers like us would want children to say things like, ये दादा दीदी लोग बहुत अच्छे हैं and they've given us food and they've given us this, they teach us and this and that. No, that was not the point. Nobody beats us anymore. So that led to this reduction in crime. And it is this long history of our experience that we wanted to work in this area with diversion, because we have seen with our eyes that, you were talking about alienation and connection. The moment children who have faced disconnection can now reconnect, certain things change.
There's this in mental health, we keep saying that the three core needs are of the need to be seen, the need to be valued and cared for, and the need to be respected. This what you're just telling him, as soon as these kids or these boys and girls started feeling this, then this the behaviors, the actions that changed so drastically.
In fact, in Kharagpur, I think one RPF personnel behaved badly with the boys. And so when the Division Security Commissions to come there monthly to say ki kaise hua and all of that, it was one of the early days. And these boys complained about. I remember, we were wondering, my God, what are the boys talking about? They're complaining about somebody who's in the RPF. He was not a very senior officer though. The boys got to know later through other RPF people that this Division Civic Security Commissioner called this man to office and told him that you don't dare, behave badly with boys. They are our responsibility. And the children got to hear about this.
That was
like, "Are aisa ho gaya hai." This real connection, and I will talk from a very rights-based angle. Children didn't realize, but they also realized it at a little level that it was not, they lost a connection with the family, but they got a connection with the state. For them, they realized that, it's now the state, the sarkar, which is
my
guardian.
Deep, if I were to ask you, what are the biggest stereotypes or biases that people have about children in conflict with law or juvenile delinquents, but many people use this phrase. What would be the stereotypes which are actually, in your experience, so working with young boys and men, it has proven to be absolutely untrue?
They're mata khara. They're mentally ill and they need treatment. Somewhere they're really mentally deranged somewhere. Otherwise, they're just plain evil. They know everything what they're doing, but they do it because they're so selfish and they just want to do it, and they're just focused on themselves and their immediate gains. Of course, they're impulsive. That's an issue with a lot of the people who get into this sort of conflict with law. A lot of us are impulsive also in many ways. But this entire construction of children in conflict with law as somebody who's mentally ill or mentally deranged or mentally unstable, and also somebody purely evil, and also because their parents must be really bad. This entire thing about their, whom they have for parents, they come from very bad families. They must have come from bad families. So the entire location of offense is somehow within like a biological sort of thing, which
There's something in that boy
Yeah.
that has made him do.
Yeah. So this idea about why children offend is very problematic with a lot of people. For a long time, I would say it's even problematic with a lot of people who are in the within child protection systems. Very problematic. And I think it comes from our inability as a society to deal with adolescence, where every sort of rebellion is considered to be, antinomian and something really like, the world will turn upside down with this rebellion. It's just, a further stronger projection of this difficult to deal with adolescence thing onto somebody who's committed an offense.
Right.
Somebody had told me long time back, a donor is that, I'm donating money to you, but this should only be for children who are under 12. I don't want this money to be for adolescents. Adolescents बहुत शैतान होते हैं, उनके लिए पैसा. So, that's why I'm saying this entire thing of adolescents and who's a child and etc. This creates the problem. This entire so if you really go deeper into it, it's not so much about crime and offenses. Somebody who had donated the money, I don't know, could be a white collar offender. We don't know in different ways. But it's actually the problem with adolescents and adolescent boys.
Yeah. Yeah. It's specifically about
Adolescent boys. That they're supposed to be like, a pack of wolves or something like that, very wild and very difficult and, very striking terror in our hearts and etc. You often find this discussion, I found 5 young boys on the train and etc. I felt afraid, I didn't say anything. It's happened. The boys know it too. That if, 5 of us are together, nobody will say anything because they're afraid of us. This is another way of, license that also happens. I know people are afraid of us because they think we'll do these things like us. We could get away with it.
If you had to, an adolescent boy who knows this, that, this is the kind of impression I give. This is what the world around me thinks of me. I mean, I'm imagining, or I can almost feel that the boy must also be, even if there's a feeling of sense of power, there's also a feeling of, this is how they look at me. This is what they think I'm capable of doing all the time, at every space.
Absolutely.
What is the kind of messaging that you do with adolescent boys? Very intentionally and very strategically. What is the kind of messaging?
We connect them with our adolescents. Because to them, we are like authority figures or figures who know the people
Older
who
men.
are older men, role models, somebody they might look up to you, somebody whom they like to be with. So we link with our adolescents with their adolescents. We become vulnerable to them. We talk to them about what we do. Like, just now said that somebody, if we get to know that this is how people behave, think about us. On one hand, it's like, why do they think about us like that? On the other hand, it's also we use it. You talk to me autobiographically. I've done this a lot of times. I know that when I was an adolescent, I would get angry. That are the faces that, in the faces of my parents were like real terror. I would not be angry anymore. But I realized, oh my God, I could create this terror. So let me carry on for some time.
So you call it out.
Yes. So I tell that guy, I've had this experience. Haven't you had this experience? He says, yes, I have had this too. That's where the connection starts. And then I can say, we really need to get hold of ourselves and take ourselves further on this because it used to happen that way. Amar erokom hoyechilo. Later I realized that, this was not, I didn't like people telling me that, this guy, behaves in this sort of way. I positively felt rejected sometimes.
Misunderstood.
This is not who I am. And so how I decided to make up and say, no, it's not this and etc. So these are the stories. I think stories help a lot. The problem with a lot of us who work with young people are that we are adults and we are, trying to be in these authority figures. We think that we should not talk about our, shenanigans to the child. But that's what is so important. We have done this. This
I have been in your place. This is how I have also felt.
And I felt like that. And then, you make it very clear, that, you were telling me this story, I remember a story from what I did like this. There's an immense immediate connect. See, no young boy or an adolescent child is doing something because he or she wants to harm himself or herself. No. People don't, there might be, you are a psychologist and will know there might be some people who there, but for most whom we meet, they don't want to harm somebody else. It's just that certain things happen because of too many veils in communication on both sides. But I think adults showing their vulnerability to younger children, to adolescents, actually helps the adolescent to become responsible. All of us will have, let's say, memories of being responsible. If there's been a sudden death in the family and you're just 15 years old,
Yeah.
if we had experiences of that or a crisis, we know even as a 15-year-old, how we reacted, how we stood up in support of the family and other people. It's not that people don't realize that. They do. But for that to happen, we need to be also very honest with them.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the opposite of alienation is connection. So,
Yeah.
very beautifully put. Before we leave, I would like you to sing a song or give me a song that uh, captures the essence of your work.
আমার মুক্তি সর্বজনের মনের মাঝে, দুঃখ বিপদ তুচ্ছ করা কঠিন কাজে, বিশ্বধাতার যজ্ঞশালা, আত্মহোমের বহ্নি জ্বালা, জীবন যেন দিই আহুতি মুক্তি আসে, এই আকাশে আমার মুক্তি আলোয় রাত।
For our non-Bengali audience, can you just give me an essence of this song?
What this is saying is that in this wide world, this space of the sky, uh, my liberation is in the light that comes in. My liberation is in the hearts of all people. It is in trying to, like a homa, like a sacrifice of myself into this entire joyful world that is there. So where my liberation is in the fact that I can sort of give to people and connect with them.
How beautiful. And I think, like you said, adolescence actually, the core essence of adolescence is the need to belong, the need to give and connect. So I think it's beautiful. Thank you so much, Dee, for
Thank you for having me. It was great. Yeah.
Thank you very much for listening into this episode of Inclusion by Design. This episode for me really spoke about policies, practices, and programs that actually look at equity and inclusion intentionally, committedly, and very strategically. It sparked many conversations inside me about my adolescence and the adolescent boys who form a big part of my family and friends. I hope many parts of this conversation today have resonated with you. Do write into us with your comments, your queries, and your suggestions. Till the next conversation, inclusion in action. See you in the next episode.